everyone, it's the Mike Rogers Show. Mike Rogers here with you. And today, wait a minute. Don't forget to click like or subscribe. Like or subscribe down here. There's a button. You can click like. You can click subscribe. Anyways, today you're going to love this interview because today we have the lead singer from the world famous band Starbenders, Miss Kimi Shelter. Yay!
Hi, everybody.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
All right, just basically staying home every day.
Yeah.
So Kimi, can you introduce yourself to us and tell us everything,
Well, my name is Kimi. I front a rock and roll band from Atlanta, Georgia called Starbenders. And that's pretty much it. I sing and I play guitar in the band. We've got 4 members. My drummer's name is Emily Moon, bassist is Aaron Lacine, and lead guitar player is Chris Tokai. And yeah.
Well, so how did you get started in the Starbenders?
Well, I was at a little bit of a crossroads in my life, and I went and auditioned for a band.
Mm-hmm.
That ended up not really turning into anything, but that's how I met our producer and manager, Nico Constantine.
Oh.
Yes, he was music directing for that band,
mm-hmm.
and producing. And
mm-hmm.
so when that thing didn't really happen, I knew I wanted to still keep working with Nico because he was just so enigmatic and like he just is magical. He's a magical person, and you know how it is with creatives. Like when you meet somebody with magic, you're like, come back, So I started sending songs to him of things that I was writing, and he told me to put a band together and put a few more songs together and wanted to record me. So I hadn't ever fronted a band before. I was just a guitar player for people, like a hired gun.
Yeah.
So this was like the first time I was like, well, shit, I guess I'll sing, So I started doing that. And Aaron, the bass player that's with me now, and Starbender mm-hmm. was also in that failed attempt at a band.
Oh.
Yes. So Aaron was the first person I called to join Starbenders with me. And so we just sort of pieced it together, and we just followed the breadcrumbs of the universe and led us to now. We met Chris about a year after the band started. We had mm-hmm. a couple friends that were helping us get down the road that were in other bands and things like that. And so we met Chris and brought him in, and then a couple years after that is when Emily joined, and we found her on Craigslist, which is pretty hilarious because that's generally where you find furniture, not drummers. Like Emily, so it was just that's kind of been how the band's been since inception. It was just all these little things that led to the 4 of us being together. And I think the way in which we complete one another and complement one another musically and in other ways in friendship as well has been something that's kept us hanging on in the dark moments, in the dark nights of the soul. It's truly because we're all very impressed with each other and excited to work with one another, and each person has brought so much to the organism as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So when stuff gets really shitty, you're just like, if this thing wasn't meant to work, like these beautiful musicians, these stars wouldn't have aligned. And so it's like, it's for me, it's how I kind of hold on,
So how many years ago was that?
We started I think in 2016, but
mm-hmm.
we really don't consider the born on date until Emily joined, because it really was like the full formation.
Yeah.
Everything locking into place.
Well, you guys have a very powerful band. I've seen them live a few times, and the sound is, everything's together, and it's really a lot of power. And you listen to it, and you think like, how can 4 people have such a powerful groove, and everything's just, everything is stable. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, in that case, in that sense, it's kind of like jazz music. It reminds me of, but I don't. Yeah. It's not jazz music though.
Yeah, well, we do get jazzy sometimes.
Oh,
but, yeah. No, it's like chemistry. It's a stable compound. As opposed to an unstable compound or just self-destruct. So, I think that's been something that's really special about our thing, especially like. For all of us, we've all dedicated our lives and our beings to our craft and to music, and the 4 of us, we just all really love music and love playing, and this is what we want to do. So it's there's always been those people that come in and out that are like, they want to keep their game night, or they have a backup plan, or other things, but all of us have always been like, no, this is all we want to do, and so that's been really refreshing too, because it's like such a bummer when you have to like convince people to be into it. You never want to convince somebody to love you, or love what you're doing. So that's been something that's really nice as well.
That's really good. I was in a band a long time ago, and the band from San Francisco called the Nuns.
Yeah.
They opened for the Sex Pistols. So maybe 6 or 8 months before that, they opened for the Sex Pistols. They called us up and said, "Can you come up to San Francisco and open for us?" So I was like, "Sure." And so was the guitar player. But those other 2 idiots in the band, they said, "No, we can't go that day." And I was like, "Why not?" And they said, "We have to go surfing." Yeah. We promised our friends. I was like, "You live in California. You can go surfing every day."
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that kind of shit. And that's, I guess people who aren't in it would think that something like that would be rare, but it's not. Like finding musicians who actually want to play music is actually, it's pretty difficult, So it's just been really great, like to have a group of people that aren't scared to burn all the ships, and as we go along and as the years go by, more and more of these ships get burned. And what I mean by that, obviously you know what I mean by that, but what I mean by it is your backup plans. Or,
yeah.
You're dedicated to being where you are. Like there's no way off the island. And so, as we go along, it's like you'll get hit by something, or something will happen. It's like, fuck, I guess there was one more ship, or oh, god damn it, I guess there was one more thing, but this is it. So, and the 4 of us are on the page. So that's such an incredible blessing, especially considering just how tense the world in general has become the last few years. And every industry's been hit really hard, but music and musicians in general, like I just give it up to everybody in any creative field or whatever, like everybody that's kind of hung in there and kept going, even though we were considered to be unnecessary or unimportant pieces of society at times. Like the people that have stuck in there.
Wow.
Like I give it up to everybody that made it through these past few years.
Yeah. Well, so tell us about your childhood. So when did you start? Like, what was the first concert you went to? What was the first record you bought? How did you go from regular kid to rock and roll star? How did that happen?
Well, so my mom was an ex-Flower child.
Oh.
Who, one of her most famous stories is that she served Janis Joplin a bottle of whiskey up in Boston once. She was just kind of in the mix up in New England, in the 60s and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, so she kind of was coming from that, and I think at some point she decided she wanted to protect us from living so vulnerably, or like living, like she wanted to save us from the pain of living in the way that she lived.
Mm-hmm.
And experiencing things in the way that she experienced. And one of the big things that was sacrificed through that was music.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were coming up, she was terrified of us listening to like anything heavy or whatever. And so I started playing violin when I was 5, and my sister was on cello, my older sister.
Oh.
And so we were very strictly raised in classical music, and went to the symphony every like Atlanta Symphony Orchestra every Sunday morning. And we didn't go to church, we went to the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. And it was like violin was like number one, and I kind of turned into this child prodigy in a way, where like I was playing with the high school orchestra when I was in like elementary school age, and like doing these like little camps and competitions, and
wow,
like doing performances in the middle of the mall, and like all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And so my dad, in the meantime, he was always really into post-punk and college radio at that time. So he loved like Pixies and PJ Harvey and all these artists, and like on the post-punk side of things, like Joy Division, Depeche Mode. And so I would be, when I would be alone with my dad and get into his car, we would listen to that stuff. And it was like contraband, you know, because it was like, you know, it wasn't classical, it wasn't Bach,
right?
You know? So I started to get really, really into it. And my sister, my older sister, she tattled on me. She busted me because I was listening to like the rock radio station or something in my room. And I remember my mom was like bitching me out, and I was like, I promise I'm not a headbanger, Mom. And she was like, you're a headbanger. I shit you not. It was like a Twisted Sister video. She was like, I knew you're a headbanger. And I was like, I'm not a headbanger, Mom. You know? So, you know, it just went on like that. And my dad would kind of slip me stuff, and she'd find it and break the CDs in front of my face, things like that. And like, so it just made it all the more alluring.
Yeah.
And by the time I got into high school, into the 9th grade, I was like, I'm putting my foot down, no more violin, and I'm gonna play guitar. And she honestly was just like, okay. She just gave up and was like, okay, fine, do it, you know, go to the dark side. And so she just dropped it, you know, and then eventually like did a complete 180, and, you know, kind of went back, is now back to being a flower child and living her truth. So but so I started playing guitar, and my first guitar teacher used to play with Great White and bands like that. So he was a metalhead, and I kind of came in there with the dexterity from the violin, and he was like, oh shit, I think you might like this stuff. And so he started showing me like neoclassical shred stuff like Yngwie and all these guys. And started just, honestly, he didn't even teach me open position chords or anything. Like I think the first song I learned was like Photograph by Def Leppard, and then it was like on from there. Like I knew how to like sweep and tap and things like that before I knew what a G chord was. And so I would go, like, if I had like other little friends that played music or whatever, like I had a little friend that played drums, and I'd go jam with him, but I'd be like, I didn't know how to jam because I was just like I would just start like tapping and shit, and they'd be like, you know, like, you just, like play a groove. I'm like, what's a groove? I have no idea. And so I basically just took all that violin stuff and realized that if I played it on a guitar, it was metal. And I was like, oh my God, metal's awesome. Yeah, and so then I just completely went down like a metal rabbit hole, like metal and punk and all rock and roll, everything, just the floodgates opened, and I developed this hustle around that time where, so basically my mom was teaching at the middle school that was across the way from the high school that I went to, and I was walking across the field that was in between the two of them, and I saw all these like broken pieces of black plastic everywhere, and I'm like, what is this? What is all this stuff? And I guess somebody was skeet shooting with vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
So they were, you know, throwing skeet and then
Oh
shooting.
yeah.
And I didn't know what vinyl was. We didn't have a record player, obviously. Like it wasn't like kind of back in vogue yet.
Yeah.
To have vinyl and everything. And so I had never like messed with that stuff, and so I'm picking up these pieces of records, and I'm like, what is this shit? And I picked up one that was still intact, and it was Dizzy Gillespie and Zoot Sims, which you brought up jazz in the beginning, but acid jazz.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? Acid jazz? And so I went home, I cleaned it up, I called up a few friends. I'm like, do you have a record player, or do your parents have a record player, and can I borrow it? And so I managed to get one from one of my friends and played this record, and I was just instantly like, oh my fucking God, because, you know, I had come from the streaming generation where there was nothing you held really, and there was CDs and things like that, but it was full streaming generation.
Yeah.
And so I just, not only was my mind blown by the Zoot Sims and Dizzy Gillespie record, and like realizing like where punk and rock and roll and everything really got started was from these guys and this type of music, but just vinyl in general. And so I started asking all my friends at school. I wrote down like a list of artists, so I'd be like Led Zeppelin, the Ramones, Rainbow, whatever, just write down everything I was interested in. I'd be like, go look through your parents' record collections and see if you can find any of this shit, and I'll give you $5. And so they would go into their parents' attics and all this, and like back into their record collections, and get together all these vinyls. And so I kind of developed this little hustle. So I was getting these really rare records. Like I eventually had every single Led Zeppelin, like all originals, like every single Rolling Stones, every single Beatles, like every single Fleetwood Mac, like really rare, you know, shit. And you know, there was only one time I got in trouble. Like I guess somebody's parent got off work and had a couple stiff ones and wanted to walk down memory lane, and they realized their Moody Blues record wasn't there anymore. So, you know, I got in trouble for that one, because, you know, my little hustle was figured out.
Well, I don't know why that's your fault. I mean, you're just providing a service, right?
Yeah, it's your child. It was your child's fault.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that was like how I really started to get into music, and the fabric of not only like who I was as this little person that was figuring out who they were, but it was also like my discovery of the world through that stuff. And it was just so exciting because it was entirely my own journey, and like I didn't have people showing me stuff. I was just like uncovering and like looking through all this stuff, and it was just such a fun, exciting time. And at that same time was when I started, you know, shifting from violin into guitar as well, and just completely falling in love with guitar and Van Halen and all these guys. That was my first concert, was Van Halen. And it was down in Jacksonville, Florida, because we were living down in Brunswick at that time, in Brunswick, Georgia, south.
Wow, you know, when I when I first heard you guys, so there are several things that you said to me that I think are coincidences, but I don't believe in coincidences. I think everything happens for a reason. So finding the record intact, that is, I don't know, the hand of God or the great electrod or nature or whatever. And then so many things that have happened to you in your life leading you to where you are. That reminds me of, I think it was George Harrison who said, you can't be anywhere where you're not supposed to be.
Yeah.
So that's really cool.
Yeah. I feel all that stuff too. One of my favorite quotes is "Be where your hands are," you know.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, absolutely. That's always been how I cultivated, you know, what eventually became my faith and my spirituality was through music, because we were not shown any sort of traditional religion, faith, or belief system. Part of my mom's leftover flower child shit was thinking it was a good idea to just let us entirely figure everything out on our own, including the concept of God or spirituality or whatever. And so we had no structure or sort of fabric in that. And so all of what I eventually came to know as a higher power came from music. All of it. Because that was what magic was. And you know, I had somebody, sometimes I'll, you know, get a little woo-woo with people and ask them, like, what do you think faith is? Like, what is faith? And the answer was, it's believing in magic, you know? And so there's nothing more magical than you know, a fucking guitar plugged in through an 800, like fucking playing a power chord, you know? So it's well,
even through mankind, music has always been associated with this sort of, if you want to call it magic or spirituality, I don't know what it's called, but I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, and music, you know, early music was designed to sort of praise and worship. You know, and communicate and sort of cross over that veil in between worlds. There's a reason why there's chanting and all of these sort of things and rituals when people are sort of trying to cross the veil and things like that, and all of these cultures all over the world. So I just think that it was really interesting, like you said, like how that found me in the middle of this field in like fucking bumfuck Georgia.
That's just amazing.
Recipe record, So
anyway, Kimi, I'd like to end part one of this interview, and then in the next part, I'd like to talk about Starbenders, what's going on, and you. I don't know. Did Nico say you have a new record coming? I can't remember what he said. You have a new record coming out. I'd like to talk about that. I'd like to talk about how you got your record deal after like only 6 years. That's amazing. So I'd like to talk about that in part two, and so I'd like to end this part one. I'm Mike Rogers Show, here with the lead singer of Starbenders, Kimi Shelter, and we'll be back tomorrow for part two. And please check it out, and please come and listen. So thank you so much, Kimi.
See you guys tomorrow.
Bye.